Alright guys, so due to the graphic nature of this content, listener discretion is advised. You already know what this is. We are finishing up the last bit of the Dean Corll case. And where we had left off was the shooting and the confession by Elmer Wayne Henley after he had shot Dean Corll, after him being incapacitated and waking up being tied up and taped alongside Tim Curley and Rhonda Williams. So, here we go. In PPD custody, Henley initially was questioned in relation to the killing of Corll. He recounted the events of the previous evening and morning, explaining that he had shot Corll in self-defense. The statements given by Curley and Williams corroborated Henley's account, and the detective questioning Henley believed that he indeed acted in self-defense. When questioned regarding his claim that Corll has threatened him that morning and he had shouted that he had killed several boys, Henley explained that for almost 3 years, he and Brooks had helped procure teenage boys, some of whom had been their own friends, for Corll, who had raped and murdered them. Henley gave a verbal statement that he initially had believed the boys he had abducted were to be sold in a Dallas-based organization for homosexual acts, sodomy, maybe later killing, but soon learned that Corll was himself killing the victims procured. Henley admitted that he had assisted Corll in several abductions and murders, and that he had actively participated in the torture and the mutilation of 6 or 8 victims prior to their murder. Most victims have been buried in a southwest Houston boat shed, and others were buried at Lake Sam Rayburn and High Island Beach. Corll had paid up to $200 for each victim he or Brooks were able to lure into his apartment. So the Dallas-based organization, we're going to come into that after we do the trial and the sentencing and whatnot, because this ties into a lot of other things too. Like I was telling you, there were some comparisons between him and Gacy, and there was a thing that Gacy had said in his confessional tapes regarding this person, and that there may have been a possibility Corll knew the same person. So this is, or knew of the same person. So this is how it's gonna probably play out in the end. Police initially were skeptical of Henley's claims, assuming that the sole homicide of the case was that of Corll, which they had ascribed as being a result of drug-fueled fisticuffs and that had turned deadly. Henley was quite insistent, however, upon his recalling the names of 3 boys, Cobble, Hilligeist, and Jones, from whom he stated he and Brooks had procured for Corll. Police accepted that there was something in his claims, as all 3 teenagers were listed as missing at the Houston Police Department. Hilligeist had been reported missing in the summer of '71, and the other 2 boys had been missing for 2 weeks. Moreover, the floor of the room where the 3 teenagers had been tied to recovered in a thick plastic sheeting. Police also found plywood torture board measuring 8 by 3 feet, with handcuffs attached to nylon rope at 2 corners. The nylon ropes to the other 2, they also found Corll's address, where a large hunting knife, rolls of clear plastic of the same type used to cover the floor, a portable radio rigged to a pair of dry cells to give increased volume, and an electric motor with loose wires attached. 8 pairs of handcuffs and a number of dildos, thin glass tubes, and lengths of rope. Corll's Ford Ecoline van parked in the driveway conveyed with a similar impression. The rear windows of the van were sealed by opaque blue curtains. In the rear of the vehicle, police found a coil of rope and a swatch of beige rug covered in soil stains, and a wooden crate with air holes drilled into sides. The pegboard walls inside the rear van were rigged with several rings and hooks. Another wooden crate with air holes drilled in the sides were found in Corll's backyard. Inside this crate were several strands of human hair. So this is a little excerpt from the report. He, quote unquote, Henley, started to take a step inside, quote unquote, the boat shed. Then His face just turned ashen pale, grim. He staggered out around the door, and that's when he knew there was gonna be bodies in that shed. Houston police officer describing Henley's actions upon leading police to Corll's boat shed on August 8th. So this is a passage. So the search for the victims, guys. As soon as Henley started opening up about the murders and the missing teens and what was going on, the confession initially, police took him to the boat shed, Southwest Houston, where he claimed the bodies. Most of the victims would be found. Inside the boat shed, police found stolen half-stripped car, a child's bike, a large iron drum, water containers, 2 sacks of lime, a large plastic bag full of teenage boys' clothing. 2 prison trustees began digging through the soft shell crushed earth of the boat shed and soon uncovered the body of a young blonde-haired teenage boy laying on his side, encased in clear plastic and buried beneath the layer of lime. Police continued excavating beneath through the earth of the shed, unearthing the remains of more victims in varying stages of decomposition. Most of the bodies were found in sorry guys, were wrapped in thick, clear plastic sheeting, like more like like where painters, like a painter's cloth, like with like a plastic tarp. That's what they were wrapped in. Some victims had been shot, others strangled. The ligature was still wrapped tightly around their necks. So remember when I told you there was comparisons between Gacy and Corll, and the comparisons were that of the same type of victim, which were teenage boys. The handcuff game, which they pretend to be handcuffed, or they had the handcuff key in between their fingers or in their back pocket. That's how they were to be able to escape. Whereas to where Gacy, he had the handcuff key in between his fingers. There's also the ligatures that they were left around the necks, and the stuffing of cloth in the throat. The stuffing of cloth in the throat was to, in Corll's case, was to asphyxiate. I can't talk right now. Asphyxiate the victim, as to where Gacy's case, it was to prevent any leakage from the mouth from coming out. So, the lime, they both were like adamant about adding the lime to the body to advance decomposition, so they would rot faster. Most of the bodies were found like either with been shot or strangled and ligature wrapped around their necks. Still, all the victims had been sodomized, and most victims bore evidence of sexual torture. Pubic hairs had been plucked out, genitals had been chewed, objects had been inserted into the rectums. So what he would do with like the glass tubes, dildos, whatnot, they'd be stuck up in there too. And again, I do not mean to offend anybody. I'm just simply reading the reports that are on here. And I'm laying in my mom's room and doing this. So if you hear like a squeaky noise, that's the bed. Alright. Glass rods have been inserted into the urethras and smashed. Cloth rags have also been inserted into the victims' mouths, and adhesive tape would be wrapped around their faces to muffle their screams. The tongue of the first victim, uncovered, protruded over 1 inch beyond the tooth margin. The mouth of the third victim, unearthed on August 8th, was so agape that the upper and lower teeth were visible, leading investigators to theorize the young man had died with a scream on his lips. At the recovery of the 8th body, the boat shed was completed at 8:55 p.m. The investigation was discontinued until the next day. Accompanied by his father, Brooks presented himself at HPD headquarters on the evening of August 8th and gave a statement in which he denied any participation in the murders, but admitted to knowing that Corll had raped and killed 2 young youths in 70. On the morning of August 9th, Henley gave a full written statement detailing he and Brooks's involvement, his own, and Brooks's involvement with Corll and the abduction and murder of numerous youths. In his confession, Henley readily admitted that he, having personally killed approximately 9 youths, and to have assisted Corll in the strangulation of others. He stated that only 3 abductions and murders Brooks had not assisted him in, and Corll were committed in the summer of 73. That afternoon, Henley accompanied police to Lake Sam Rayburn, where he, Brooks, and Corll had buried 4 bodies killed that year. 2 additional bodies were found in the shallow limestone graves located close to a dirt road beside a lakeside log cabin owned by Corll's family. The police had found a second plywood torture board, rolls of plastic sheeting, shovels, and a sack of lime. Police have also found 9 additional bodies in the boat shed on August 9th. These bodies were recovered between 12:05 p.m. and 8:30 p.m., and all were in an advanced state of decomposition. One of the bodies unearthed bore evidence of sexual mutilation. The several genitals of the victim were found inside a sealed plastic bag placed beside the body. Another victim unearthed had several fractured ribs. The 13th and 14th bodies unearthed bore identification cards naming them as Donald and Jerry Waldrop. So they found the 2 brothers. Brooks gave a full confession on the evening of August 9th, admitting to being present at the several killings and assisting in several burials, although he continued to deny any direct participation in the murders in reference to the torture board upon which Corll had restrained and tortured his victims. Brooks stated, "Once they were on the board, they were good as dead. It was all over, but the crying and the shouting." He agreed to accompany police to High Island Beach to assist the search for the rest of the victims. August 10th, Henley again accompanied police to Lake Sam Rayburn, where 2 bodies were found but just 10 feet apart, as with the 2 bodies found the previous day. Both victims had been tortured and severely beaten, particularly around the head. That afternoon, both Henley and Brooks accompanied police on High Island Beach, leading police to the shallow graves of 2 more victims. On August 13th, both Henley and Brooks again accompanied police to High Island Beach, where 4 more bodies were found, making it a total of 27 known victims. The worst killing spree in American history at the time. Remember, guys, this is prior to Gacy. Henley initially insisted that there were 2 more bodies to be found inside the boat shed, and that the bodies of 2 more boys had been buried at High Island Beach in 72. At the time, the killing spree was the worst case of a serial murder in terms of number of victims. The United States exceeding the 25 murders attributed by Juan Corona, who had been arrested in California in 71 for killing 25 men. The macabre number of known victims attributed to the single murder case set by Corll and his accomplices were only surpassed in 78 by John Wayne Gacy, who murdered 33 boys, a young man who admitted to being influenced by coverage press of the Houston mass murders to manacle his victims prior to the abuse and murder. See, I told you guys, this is prior to Gacy. Gacy actually copied the method of murder and torture, some of the torture methods of the victims from Dean Corll. Families of Corll's victims were highly critical of HPD, who had been quick to list the missing boys as runaways who had not been considered worthy of a major investigation. The families of the murdered youths asserted that the police should have noted that an insidious trend of the pattern of differences of teenage boys from the Heights neighborhoods. Other family members complained that HPD had been rather dismissive of their adamant insistence, knowing that their sons had no reason to run away from home, especially the boys that were going to the swimming pool. You know, when they were going through in the case of Malleywinkle and his friend Billy Bulch. You don't run away from home in nothing but a bathing suit and 80 cents in your pocket. You're barefoot. They were going to the local swimming pool. They were picked up by both Brooks and Henley, and they were unfortunately victims of Dean Corll. Alright, so Everett Waldrop, the father of Donald and Jerry Waldrop, complained that shortly after his sons disappeared in 71, he had informed the police that an acquaintance had observed Corll burying what seemed to be bodies on his boat shed. In response, the police performed a perfunctory search around the boat shed before dismissing the reports as a hoax. Waldrop stated that one occasion he had visited HPD, the police chief simply told him, "Why are you down here? You know your boys are runaways." So that's kind of a fucked up thing for police to say. I think, they should instead of assuming they're runaways, once you investigate the missing, there's so many missing cases out there. There's another subject I want to touch up on, not now, but in the future, regarding missing persons cases. I think they should really go in and really investigate, because there's no way, I know I get people run away, but there's no way that all fucking missing people are runaways. It's ridiculous. And in that time, for people to be saying, yeah, they're just runaways, like, why don't you just drop it? There's no way in hell I would drop anything like that. I'd be like, no, something's wrong. As a parent, something's wrong, and they knew something was wrong. They felt it. They had to have felt something. And for the police to dismiss that as a runaway case, that's just bullshit. Alright, continuing on. By May of 1974, the 21 of Corll's victims had been identified, but all but 4 of the youths having either lived in or close connections around the Houston Heights. 2 more teenagers were later identified in 83 and 85, to whom Richard Kepner also lived in Houston Heights. The other youth, Willard Branch, lived in Oak Forest district, and it was a district of Houston. Alright, so here comes the indictment. On August 13th, the grand jury convened in Harris County to hear evidence against Henley and Brooks. First witnesses were to testify Will Williams and Corll, who testified on the events of August 7th and 8th leading to the death of Corll. Another witness who testified to his experience at the hand of Corll was Billy Rigninger. If you guys remember, Billy was the one that Owen Brooks saved before he, in punishment for asking Corll to release Billy, was raped. After listening to over 6 hours of testimony from various people, on August 14th, the jury initially indicted Henley on 3 counts of murder, Brooks on 1 count. Bail for each youth was set at $100,000. The DA requested that Henley undergo a psychiatric examination to determine whether he was mentally competent to stand trial, but his attorney, Charles Medler, opposed the decision, stating that the move would violate Henley's constitutional rights. By that time, the grand jury had completed the investigation. Henley had been indicted for 6 murders and Brooks for 4. Henley was not charged in the death of Corll, which prosecutors ruled on September 18th had been committed in self-defense. Elmer Wayne Henley and David Owen Brooks were tried separately in the roles for the murders. Henley was brought to trial in San Antonio on July 1st in 74, charged with 6 murders committed between March of 72 and July of 73. The prosecution called dozens of witnesses, including Corll and Rigninger. Rigninger testified that Corll's home, he was tied and tortured to the torture board and assaulted repeatedly, and by Corll before he was released. Other incriminating testimonies came from police officers who read from Henley's written statement. One part of his confession, Henley had described luring 2 of the victims for whose murders he had been brought to trial, Cobble and Jones, to Corll's Pasadena residence. Henley had confessed that after their initial abuse and torture at Corll's home, Cobble and Jones each had one wrist and ankle bound to the same side of Corll's torture board. The youths were then forced to Corll to fight each other with the promise that the youth who beat the other to death would be allowed to live. After several hours of the youth beating each other, Jones was tied to a board and forced to watch Cobble be assaulted, tortured, and shot to death before he himself was again raped, tortured, and strangled with the Venetian blind cord. The 2 youths were killed on July 27th in 1973. 2 days after that, they had been reported missing. Several victims' parents have had to leave the courtroom to regain their composure as police and medical examiners described how their relatives were tortured and murdered. That's one of the most heartbreaking things someone can go through, is going through a murder trial and hearing how their loved one was maliciously attacked and murdered and disposed of. in the case of I'm just gonna stop and like take a pause right here. And then the case of Luca Magnotta and his murder, the murder of Junlin, my bad, Junlin. His father was the one. Junlin's father was at the trial, because he was the only one in his family that was at the trial, because he did not want his wife to hear the grim details of what his son went through when he was murdered by Luca Magnotta. So continuing on with this, July 15th, 1974. They're still introducing the trial throughout the trial. This is before they're still going throughout the trial. The state introduced 82 pieces of evidence, including Corll's torture board and one of the boxes used to transport the victims. Inside the box, police had found hair, which examiners concluded came from both Cobble and Henley. Upon advice from his defense counsel, Henley did not take the stand to testify. His attorney, Will Gray, cross-examined several witnesses, but did not call any witnesses or experts for the defense. On July 15th, 74, both counsels presented their closing arguments to the jury. Fuck, I can't talk right to save my fucking life, guys. The prosecution seeking life imprisonment, the defense of a verdict of not guilty, and closing argument to the jury. District Attorney Carol Vance apologized for his not being able to seek the death penalty, adding that the case was the most extreme example of a man's inhumanity to man I've ever seen. The jury deliberated for 92 minutes before finding Henley guilty of all 6 murders for which he was tried. The following day, July 16th, formal procedures to sentence Henley for the 6 guilty verdicts began. On August 8th, Judge Preston Dial ordered that Henley serve each 99-year sentence conclusively, totaling 594 years. He was transferred to Huntsville Unit to formally begin his sentence. Henley appealed his sentence and conviction, contending the jury in his initial trial had not been sequestered, that his attorney's objections to news media being present in the courtroom had been overruled, and citing that his defense team's attempts to present evidence contending that the initial trial should not have been held in San Antonio, but also have been overruled by the judge. Henley's appeal was upheld, and he was rewarded a retrial in December 78. His retrial began on June 18th, 1979. The second trial was held in Corpus Christi when Henley, again represented by defense attorneys Will Gray and Ed Pegelow. Henley's attorneys again attempted to have Henley's written statements ruled inadmissible. However, Judge Noah Kennedy ruled those written statements given by Henley on August 9th as admissible evidence. The retrial lasted 9 days, with Henley attorneys calling again no defense witnesses and again attacking the credibility of Henley's written confession. The defense also contended the evidence provided by the state belonging to Dean Corll, not Elmer Wayne Henley. On June 27th, 1979, the judge deliberated for over 2 hours before reaching their verdict. Henley was again convicted of 6 murders and sentenced to 6 concurrent 99 terms. Brooks. So, yeah, he still got the same verdict. I mean, there was no way that, he was going to get away with that shit or get it overturned or his sentence reduced. He is guilty. He actively participated, and, he had opportunities to just fucking stop and, do the right thing, but did he stop? No. He was just as evil as Corll. And that proves it. Brooks was brought to trial on February 27th, 1975. He had been indicted for 4 murders committed between December 1970 and June of 73, but was brought to trial charged only with the 1973 murder of 15-year-old William Ray Lawrence. Brooks' defense attorney Jim Skelton argued that his client had not committed any murders or attempted to portray Corll, and to a lesser degree Henley, as an active participant in the actual killings. The assistant district attorney Tommy Dunn dismissed the defense contention outright. So I'm trying to say connection is contention. Oh my god. At one point telling the jury this defendant was in on the killing, this murderous rampage from the very beginning. He tells you he was a cheerleader if nothing else. That's what he's telling you about his presence. You know he was in on it. Brooks' trial lasted less than a week. The jury had deliberated for 90 minutes before they had reached a verdict. He was found guilty of Lawrence's murder on March 75 and sentenced to life imprisonment. Brooks showed no emotion as the sentence was passed, although his wife had burst into tears. Brooks also appealed his sentence, contending the signed confession used against him were taken without being informed of his legal rights, but his appeal was dismissed in 79. Alright, so there was a thing that they were saying that while Brooks was away, he was afraid that Corll and Henley were going to kill him, his wife, and their daughter. He was paranoid. It was said that he would sleep in the living room or in a chair, sit in a chair by the front door because he was afraid that they were going to bust in and do some shit. He had a loading gun with him at all times. This is the incarceration, guys. We're almost done. Yay. Like I said, I have no problem doing the serial killer files, but when you get invested in the time and you're reading on the initial file itself, the subjects in hand and the victims, you feel so bad. You just want to cry or get mad. I was pissed off reading it. It's like what I was doing with Gacy. I was so mad because the motherfuckers, both of them were fucking cocky as shit. So here we go. Incarceration. Henley is serving his life sentence at the Mark W. Michael Unit in Anderson County, Texas. Successive parole applications dating from July of 1980 have been denied. His next eligibility for parole will be in October of 2025. Brooks served his life sentence at the Terrell Unit in Rocheron, Texas. He died of COVID-19 related complications in Galveston Hospital on May 28th of 2020. So, David Owen Brooks is dead. He died of COVID complications. Corll and his accomplices were known to have killed a minimum of 28 teenagers and young men between the September of 1970 and August of 1973. Although it's suspected that the true number of victims could be 29 or more, as Corll had killed immediately prior to his murders being discovered. The true number of victims he had claimed will never be known. To date, 27 of Corll's known victims have been identified. The identity of the 28th victim, whose body has never been found, is conclusively known. All these victims have been killed by either shooting, strangulation, or a combination of both. So, yeah. So this is it, guys. This is the victim list. I'm going to be reading off the names. September 25th, Jeffrey Allen Conan, 18. December 13th, James Eugene Glass, 14th. And Danny Michael Yates. January 30th, Donald Wayne Waldrop, alongside his brother Jerry Lynn Waldrop, who was 13. He was the youngest of Corll's victims. March 9th, Randall Lee Harvey, 15th. May 29th, David William Hillegeist, 13. He was one of Henley's earliest childhood friends. So this is one of the boys that disappeared while going to the swimming pool with his friend Gregory Malley Winkle. He was 16. August 17th, Reuben Wilford Watson Haney. He was 17. This is in 1972. March 24th, Frank Anthony Aguirre. He was the fiance of Rhonda Williams, who was also a assault victim of Corll, but it was not sexual assault, it was physical assault. He beat her. April 20th, Mark Stephen Scott, 17. May 21st, Johnny Ray Delhomme. May 21st, Billy Jean Bolch Jr. He was killed alongside Johnny Ray Delhomme. July 19th, Stephen Kent Sickman. August 21st, Roy Eugene Bunton. October 2nd, Wally J. Simino. October 2nd, Richard Edward Hembry. November 1st, Willard Carmen Branch Jr. November 15th, Richard Allen Kepner. 1973, February 1st, Joseph Allen Lyles. June 4th, William Ray Lawrence. June 15th, Raymond Stanley Blackburn. July 7th, Homer Luis Garcia. July 12th, John Manning Sellers. July 19th, Michael Anthony Bulch. Michael Anthony Bulch was Billy Bulch's younger brother. Billy Bulch was killed the previous year, so unfortunately Michael followed his older brother. July 25th, Marty Ray Jones. July 25th, Charles Carey Cobble. August 3rd, James Stanton Jamala. Footnotes. This is what it is. At Henley's trial in 1974, Harris County Medical Examiner Joseph Ikemzik raised questions as whether John Sellers was actually a victim of Corll's. Sellers, a U.S. Marine who had been reported missing on July 12, 1973, had been killed by 4 gunshot wounds to the chest fired from a rifle, whereas Corll's other known victims have either been shot by the same pistol that Henley had used to kill Corll or strangled. Moreover, Sellers' car had been found burnt out in Starks, Louisiana 1 week after the youth had disappeared. The police had been led to Sellers' body on August 13th in 1973 by a trucker who recalled conversing with the youth he believed to be Henley after he had observed a car stuck in the sand close to where Sellers' body was subsequently found. The youth had rebuffed the trucker's offer of assisting to free the car, stating that he had 2 friends with him who would be able to free the vehicle. Neither Henley nor Brooks specifically mentioned Sellers being a victim of Corll's in their confession, nor had they disputed him being a victim. The official tally of victims being reduced to 26 in 1974 after after the medical examiner testified Sellers' body was probably not murdered by Corll and his accomplices. However, Sellers was the same age as Corll's known victims, and his grave on High Island Beach was close to where confirmed victims of Corll were buried. In addition, the body was found bound hand and foot with rope as other victims had been, and Sellers' autopsy reports indicates the possibility his being sexually assaulted was prior to or after his death. Alright, so remember when I told you guys that there was a anthropologist that worked in the medical examiner's office, and with, like I said, the updated modern DNA testing and technology that we have now. In 2008, Dr. Sharon Derrick, a forensics anthropologist with the medical examiner's office in Houston, released digital images of Corll's 3 still unidentified victims. The unidentified victims were listed as ML 73-3349, ML 73-3356, and ML 733378. 2 of the unidentified victims were found buried in a boat shed where they were estimated to have been killed in 1971 or 1972. ML 73378 was buried at Lake Sam Rayburn, just 10 feet from the body of Homer Garcia, who had disappeared on July 7th, 1973. The victim was estimated to be slightly more advanced to Garcia, leading investigators to estimate that he had been killed in mid to late June 1973. On October 17, 2008, ML73-3349 was identified as Randall Lee Harvey, a Heights teenager who had been reported missing on March 11, 1971. 2 days after he disappeared, Harvey, who had been shot through the eye, was wearing a navy blue jacket with red lining, jeans, lace-up boots, and a plastic orange pocket comb, also found alongside his body. The body found on the beach in Jefferson County on August 4th, 1983, was strongly believed further victim of Corll. Its scattered and skeletalized remains were discovered within the close-to plastic sheeting near eroding sandbank along the sections of rope. These remains were listed as ML83-6849. The body was identified November 11, 2009, through DNA analysis to be that of Joseph Lyles, a Heights teenager who had disappeared on February 1st, 1973. Lyles is known to have visited both Corll's apartment and had lived on the same street as Brooks, and he was listed as a possible victim of Corll after the murders were discovered in 1973. At the time of his disappearance, Corll resided in the apartment on 1855 Wirt Road, where he had lived between January 20th and March 7th in 1973. Where he had moved into his father's Pasadena bungalow. Brooks has specifically stated Corll got one boy by himself during the time he lived at this address. In addition, at the time, that was the same time Lyles had disappeared. Henley had temporarily moved to Mount Pleasant, which leaves a strong possibility Corll had killed Lyles without the assistance of Henley. September 13, 2010, DNA analysis was able to confirm that the unidentified victim known as ML733378 was actually Michael Anthony Bulch, who had incorrectly been identified of the case file ML73333, the second victim unearthed from the boat shed. Bulch had disappeared en route to a barbershop on July 19th, 1973. A year after his brother Billy had been murdered by Corll, the 1973 misidentification of Billy Bulch was discovered as a result of an independent investigation conducted by a reporter named Barbara Gibson. She submitted her research to Dr. Derrick and indicated that the second victim unearthed from the boat should have been misidentified. So Henley had confessed to the police that he and Corll choked Michael Bulch and buried him at Lake Sam Rayburn. The unidentified victim, mistakenly identified as Bulch, had been killed by 2 gunshots in the head and buried beneath the boat shed. So this is actually what helped identify Michael. November 4th, 2011, the victim, mistakenly identified as Bulch, was identified as Roy Eugene Bunton. They used Bunton's family's DNA to compare. So it's amazing what DNA updated technology can do. They can actually start identifying people that have been found, unidentified victims. They can use that in a database to find their family members through how you do the DNA testing and stuff like that, or the 27andMe, the Ancestry.com type stuff. In a confession given by Henley on August 9th, the youth has stated that the victim, Mark Scott, had been strangled and buried at High Island. So they did find Mark Scott. My bad. So they found him. They identified Mark Scott by his dental records and blood samples. Victim, known as ML73-3355, had been misidentified in the same month. The victim was identified as Stephen Sickman. All 6 bodies were directly linked to the Houston mass murders found at the High Island had been identified, as Henley's claims that the victim, known as ML733355, was shot, not Scott, had been proven to be correct. The strong suspicion remains that Scott's body remains buried on High Island. So they really didn't find Scott's body, but there was evidence that was, present. So there's that. There is the unidentified victim. So this is the 16th body that was found in the boat shed. This unidentified victim was found wearing swimming trunks, cowboy boots, a leather bracelet, and a t-shirt, leading investigators to conclude that he was likely killed in the summer months. So there is a victim name thrown out there. The name Bobby French popped up after Dr. Derrick received an anonymous package containing a series of photographs potentially depicting this individual taken shortly before his murder, and that the sender of this package named this individual as one Bobby French. So after this, the whole comparison of the victims being found or not found. Oh my God. Let me see. Hold on. So they don't know where Bobby French came from, if that's him or not, but they still have been trying to identify him. And like I said, guys, there was like a possible association with the national sex ring. So this is what this whole thing was. Remember I was telling you this kind of ties into a lot of things when I was mentioning this. During the routine investigation in March of 1975, the Houston Police Department discovered a cache of pornographic pictures and films depicting boys such as young as 8 years old, most of whom were taken from the heights. Of the 16 individuals depicted within the films and photos, 11 of the youths appeared to be among Corll's victims, who have later been identified by the state. The discovery raised the disturbing possibility that the statements that Corll had given to both Henley and Brooks prior to his murder, that he was associated with an organization based in Dallas that bought and sold boys. This may have indeed been held to a degree of truth. The discovery of the material of Houston subsequently led to the arrest of 5 individuals in Santa Clara, California. No direct link in these arrests were proven, and the Houston Police Department declined to pursue any possible link to these killings, stating that they felt that Corll's victims' families had been through enough. So there was like a thing going around saying that this guy was peddling boys out. Maybe that's how he got a hold of some of the victims that were not identified yet, or some of them that, like, the one that's missing now that's still not identified yet is Bobby French. So with the media wise, there are books and movies. There's actually documentaries about them. There's a film inspired by the mass murders called Freak Out that was released in 2003. It's directed by Brad Jones, who also starred as Corll. So the director played Corll himself, and this is before, this is like the life story during the murders and all that shit. There's just a lot of stuff going. There's like biographies, bibliographies, TV shows, documentaries, all this stuff. Investigation, Discovery, The Most Evil. They have an episode. The Clown and the Candyman, the podcast. This is what I was telling you guys. There's actually a show also on Discovery Plus that I was watching. This is what kind of inspired me to do the Candyman after, because I did John Wayne Gacy before. But like I said, there was a comparison between Gacy and Corll, and in the Candyman Killer Clown documentary, there was audio evidence that Gacy had took the or adapted the murder methods that Corll had used on his own victims. So this is it, guys. That's the end of it. I mean, I'm kind of glad this shit's over. I didn't want to keep going on with this case. Like I said, it's upsetting enough that these young men were taken so early in their lives they haven't even begun to live, and the victims were identified. One's body was not recovered, but his DNA was found within other within other places. So that being of Mark Scott, they still don't know if that boy is Bobby French or not, but I believe within time, even to this day, he will be identified. So once again, kiddies, please be aware of your surroundings. Do not get into any stranger's car. Do not hitchhike. Do not take candy from strangers. No pun intended, but seriously, be careful out there, guys. This has been Odd Broad, and you've been listening to Odd Pods of the Odd Broad. And join me tomorrow, a couple more days. I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do next. If you guys want to get a hold of me through my social medias, you can go through my Instagram, which is Odd Broad Odd Pods, or my Snapchat, which is at Cy Edwards, at CY Edwards on Snapchat. So yeah, or you can check out my Twitter at Odd Broad TV. So thanks again, guys, for listening. Have a good evening and good night.